What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Swift video. In today's video, we're going to learn about another architecture pattern in iOS and Swift, and it is MVP, otherwise known as Model View Presenter. So here is a quick overview diagram of what the heck this is. Like the name implies, you've got a model, you've got a presenter, and you've got a view. So the idea is that the presenter is the single object that handles the interaction between a view and a model. Now you're still going to have a controller. Controllers almost never go away, but I guess they're not cool enough to put the C as a part of the acronym. So we're going to take a look at an actual example instead of just a bunch of theory today. So if that sounds good, make sure you start by absolutely destroying that like button down below. Helps a lot. And hit subscribe if you're new to the channel. Let's talk about some MVP in Swift and iOS. Alright, let's go ahead and get started by opening up Xcode and creating a new project. We're going to stick with the app template under iOS, and let's go ahead and give our project a name of MVP Design Pattern. You want to make sure your language is set to Swift at the bottom here. Make sure your lifecycle is UIKit and select Storyboard for your interface. We'll be doing everything programmatically, but no Swift UI today. So go ahead and continue. I'm going to save the project onto my desktop, and let's jump right into it. So first things first, let me go and expand my Xcode window here, and let's talk about the components of the MVP pattern. So the acronym stands for Model View Presenter. So what I'm going to actually do is create a folder here, and we're going to use that acronym as the folder name. Let's go ahead and create 3 subfolders for our model, views, and presenters. We're just going to have one instance of each of them, but just for the sake of organization, to show you guys how this pattern really scales if you want to extend it for your whole application. So we'll go ahead and toss a presenter in here, and I'm going to drag the view controller here onto into the view folder. So cool, we've got this view controller here. What we're going to do is basically a real world example, like I mentioned. So let's go ahead and create a presenter. So I'm going to create a new file in here. I'm going to go ahead and call it something pretty simple. We'll call it presenter.swift. And I went ahead and copied a URL to get a API response. It's just a list of users. We're going to be using that in here momentarily, but let's go ahead and create a class. So this is going to be a user presenter, and we're going to want a delegate in here in a second, but let's go ahead and rename some of this other stuff. So let's call this view controller a users view controller. I'll also go ahead and rename the class here. Let me also go ahead and give this guy a title of users. And let's see, we also want some models. Well, one model in our case. I'm going to go into models and create a new file. And we can go ahead and call this user.swift. We're going to have a single user object, which will be returned and created, I should say, as a result of our API call. But we're going to look at how the controller, presenter, and the model all tie together and communicate with one another. So on a user, go ahead and add 3 properties: a name, a email, and then I believe a username, just like that. And before we go and give this app a run to make sure that after our changes things are working, we need to change in the main storyboard since we renamed our view controller the name in here. So go ahead and select the controller, open up the right panel, hit the 4th tab, and change the class name here to match what we updated it to, which is users view controller. I'm also going to go ahead and hit editor in the toolbar, go to embed in, and embed this view controller into a navigation controller, just so we have a nice top bar here for our title. I'll also select that bar and check this box for prefers large title, just so things look a little nicer. So before we actually start writing out our MVP pattern, let me just go ahead and select a simulator. I pick the 12 Pro Max, and we'll see what this looks like in action here. So there is our simulator. We should see a title for users at the top in just a moment. And there it is. Cool. So what we actually want to do is we want to give the presenter the responsibility of interacting between the controller and view actions. It is a presenter after all. We're also going to do the API call in here. You could abstract that to some other object. We won't today. The model is actually done. We don't really need anything else in here. And in the view controller, we're going to want to interact with the presenter based on user input and updating the view. And in our case, we're going to be showing a table view of our users. So let's go ahead and start building this out. So we have this user presenter. What we're also going to want is a protocol here. And we are going to attempt to spell things correctly. And we're going to go ahead and call this a user presenter delegate. It's going to be of type any object. And basically, these are going to be any of the functions that the controller is going to conform to and implement. So the presenter delegate, we're going to want to set this in here. So I'm going to have a single function. It'll be a public function. And we're going to say set view delegate, and this is going to be a delegate, and its type is going to be the user presenter delegate and a UI view controller. And the reason you're not getting the autocompletes is because we need to import UI kits. So this here will be a UI view controller, and we're going to hold a instance of the delegate in here. So we'll say there is a weak var delegate of this type here. So what we can actually do is call this a type alias for delegates. We can say type alias presenter delegate is going to be that, and here we'll hold a optional reference. I will also use our type alias in our actual function here, just like that. And once we get that, in here we can say delegates, we can say self.delegate equals delegate. So now in this delegate function, we want the presenter to be able to tell the view to go ahead and do stuff and interact with it. So what we're going to actually do is add a couple of functions in here. So the first that we can say is, let's see, did get users, or if you want to make it a little more declarative, we can go ahead and say present users. And this is going to show or rather take a collection of user models. The other thing we can go ahead and do in here is present a alert, or we can go ahead and actually do this, present alert with a title, which will have a string, can have a message, just like that. And let's see, we're going to want a couple other things in here, but let's just start off with that. So first and foremost, we're going to want to actually fetch our collection of users at this API endpoint. So where do we actually do that? So what we're going to do is we will create a single function in here, and it's going to be a function called get users. Just like that. I will go ahead and do a basic API call in here. So first we need to actually create the URL from this string that I took the liberty of copy and pasting beforehand. And we're just going to unwrap it, pretty simple. We'll go ahead and create a task, which will be a URL session shared, and it's going to be a data task with a URL and a completion handler. Pretty bare bones API call here, nothing too fancy in terms of the design pattern that we're talking about today. We are going to want to unwrap the data, also want to validate that the error is in fact nil, and let's see, let's not forget to actually kick off our task down here. The next thing we want to do is actually decode the response, so we're going to say let response is going to be JSON decoder, and we're going to decode a collection. That's not what we want. We want JSON decoder instance, and we want to decode a collection of users from the data that we have gotten back. And if we fail to do it, this should be a catch. We're just going to print out the error. So once we have the response back here, what we actually should do is the presenter should use the delegates to notify whoever the delegate is at that point in time that, hey, we can go ahead and present the users. Now we want to go ahead and capture weak self here because we don't want to cause a retain cycle. And here we can say self dot delegate, and in the delegate, if you recall, we added two functions. So let's go ahead and say delegate just like that. And we want to go ahead and call the function up here that we added, which is present users. So I should actually call this users, probably a more appropriate title. I will say present users, passing in our users from the line above. And that basically ends the responsibility of the presenter to go and fetch the users. So let's actually hook up this part before we talk about like tapping onto a user cell and handling that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is we're going to jump into the controller here, and we want to do two things. The first thing we want to do is set up a table view, and then we want to hook up our presenter. So let's go ahead and set up the table view first. It's going to be fairly simple, nothing too fancy going on today. So we're going to say table view is a table view. We're going to create it with this anonymous closure pattern. I'm not going to actually go ahead and create any custom cells or whatnot. We're just going to register the basic base class. So we're going to say register a UI table view cell.self for the identifier of cell. We can go ahead and add this to the view hierarchy. We want to go ahead and assign its delegates, and we actually called it table view. Table view, we'll go ahead and assign its delegate to be self, as well as assign its data source to be self as well. We want to go ahead and override view data layout sub views. And we want to give our table view a frame to match the entirety of this view, so view.bounds. Let's go ahead and conform to the delegate and data source for our table view, just like that. And then these errors will go away, and we'll need to bring in 3 table view functions. Let's try to keep it organized. First one is going to be number of rows. We'll just return 0 momentarily. Next one will be cell for row at index path. We'll go ahead and say the cell will be table view. DQ a reusable cell with an identifier of cell for the nth index path. We're going to go ahead and just return the cell. And the third one we're going to want here is did select row at index path, and we're not handling this quite yet, but we do want to first and foremost deselect. And what we're going to want to do here is ask presenter to handle the tap. So here is our basic table view outline. We set that up. Let's go ahead and create an instance of our presenter. So we're going to go ahead and say private let presenter. Presenter is going to be an instance of our user presenter object, just like that. And now we can say here presenter, the first thing we want to do is set a view delegate. So I'm going to say self. Now that's going to give us an error because we need to conform to the user presenter delegate, just like that. And now that's going to have 2 functions that we added. So I'm going to say presenter delegate. I believe the first one was present users, and the second one was present alert, just like that. That's not what we want. We want present a alert. Let's see if I can find it here. Present alert, and spelling it correctly is pretty important for autocomplete to actually help. But there is that, and then we can say on the presenter, hey, go ahead and fetch some users for us. So presenter, we can say get users. Now, once we get users, we will actually come to this function if we successfully get users. Now, what do we want to do in this present users? If our presenter tells us go ahead and present it, we're going to want to have a collection of users, which by default will be an empty array of users. And all we want to do in here is we first want to say self.users is users. And then on the main thread, so we're going to dispatch to the main thread, we'll say dispatch queue.main.async. We're going to say self.tableview reload data. So the reason we need to dispatch to the main thread is because there is no guarantee that this function will be called on the main thread. And before I give this a run, number of rows will now be users.count, which will be dynamic as the presenter tells us, and the cells text label.text will be the nth user's name. So let's go ahead and give this a run, and let's see if we can actually see a list of users. So we should see a table view, and we should be using the presenter pattern. So cool, there is a list of a bunch of different people's names. So let's take a quick look at what actually happened here before we continue. So we have a pretty bare bones view controller. We've got a table view, we've got an empty array of users, we've got a presenter. We set up the table, we set the view delegate of the presenter here, which is pretty critical. And then we say, go ahead and get users. Once the presenter has got users, it'll go ahead and say, hey delegate, present users for me. And this function, all it is going to do is assign those users and reload the table view, and that's basically where we are at. Now let's take a look at our simulator again. If I actually go and tap on one of these, nothing is happening, except the fact that we're unhighlighting the selection visually. But what we want to do is maybe show an alert with some more information about the user. So what we want to go ahead and do is we have this table view function of did select row. We want to tell the presenter that, hey, we tapped on a user. So we can say did tap user, and we can go ahead and pass in the nth user index path dot row. Now we haven't actually created this function, so let's jump back to our presenter, and in here we're going to go ahead and create it. So we'll say public func did tap user, which will take in a user model just like that. You can argue that this is maybe a little redundant in naming, so we can maybe change it to be did tap user and do that. And now what we can go ahead and do is with this will say delegate. We want to go ahead and present an alert, and we'll go ahead and say the title will be the user's name, and the message is going to be using properties in the model. We'll say user.name has an email of user.email and a username of username dot or user dot username. So we're basically delegating back to the delegate of go ahead and present this alert. Now, one other option you have is you could actually do the alert presentation directly in here. So let me show you guys both approaches because there's pros and cons to both. So now that we have this function being called, let's go ahead and change this here since we did rename it. But basically now we're going to come down into this function for present alert. So what do we want to do in here? Well, we're going to say let alert is going to be a UI alert controller. We're going to say title is going to be title, message will be message, style will be alert. We're going to add a single action to this alert. It'll be a UI alert action with a title of dismiss, a style of cancel, and a handler of nil. And then finally we can go ahead and say present the actual alert animated true. Go ahead and give this a run, and what you'll see is when you tap on any of these rows, you'll get this alert here, and you'll have the email address and the username filled in. So one questionable thing here is we're calling present in the controller, and this is a little subjective, but some folks like to say, well, this is a presentation call, so it should be handled by the presenter. So the alternative here, I'm just going to copy this code and we'll jump into our presenter once again. If you guys recall, we know that the delegate is not only just of type user presenter delegate, but it's also a view controller. So what you could do as well, instead of calling this stuff here, you could actually put all this stuff here and call this on the delegate itself because you know it is a view controller. So instead of passing this here, let me just comment this out. What I can actually do is copy it and then comment it out. We can simply assign the title and message directly in here. So there is our title. There is our message. Let's get rid of that comma here. And let's go ahead and toss an equal in between here. And basically what you'll be able to do is create the alert controller directly in here. And let's see why this is yelling at me. We've got a title and a message. Because we don't want that there. Let's go ahead and fix that. And if you actually give this a run, what you'll get is the exact same results. But the question herein lies of, do you think that the presentation of the alert should be in the presenter class or in the view controller class? Now, I'm not going to give you a clear-cut answer to that because frankly, there really isn't one. It's a little subjective. So some people like to put it in the controller. Some people like to put it in the presenter. That's up to you. And that's something that I would say you should keep consistent throughout your project. So regardless of which bucket you fall into, just make sure you're not doing both patterns in your project, because it gets messy then if you have inconsistency. So that is the MVP pattern in a nutshell. So you might be familiar with Model View Controller, MVVM. I've got a video on Viper as well if you're not familiar with that. And this is MVP, which is also fairly popular. So that's all I've got for you guys today. If you haven't smashed the like button already, don't forget to do so. It helps out tremendously. Hit subscribe for iOS, Swift, and SwiftUI videos. Comment if you use this pattern. What's your favorite iOS architecture? Let me know what you guys are working on and what videos you guys want to see. I always love hearing from you all. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.